And welcome back to Talk Business and Politics. We are joined now by Congressman Rick Crawford. He's going to talk to us a little bit about some bills that he's been working on, and also we're going to ask him some questions about his endorsement of Marco Rubio. Good morning, Congressman. How are you today?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Well, I want to start off by talking to you about a bill you recently introduced involving Cuba. You recently introduced this bill that would give agriculture producers easier access to capital and some other resources that the government offers folks working in other countries as selling our resources. Tell me a little bit about why you felt like this was the right approach to dealing with Cuba.
Well, look, I mean, you saw the action that the president took, and whether we like that or not, the fact remains that there is going to be, some activity taking place in Cuba. Now, Arkansas producers have long sought, some way in to Cuba. It's about a $400 million a year market. Arkansas stands to benefit somewhere in the neighborhood of about $36 million a year. The bulk of that coming in rice, somewhere in the neighborhood of $26 million a year, potentially for Arkansas rice producers. Arkansas is home to half of the U.S. rice crop. I represent most of that, if not all of it. And so it's important that we do everything we can to try to create more opportunities to expand global markets for crops like rice and others, and certainly poultry as well, because the two things that are staples on the Cuban diet are rice and chicken.
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, your approach has been called an incremental one. Why do you feel like this moderated movement is a better idea than just opening it up?
Well, I think it's a tough lift to go for the wholesale repeal of the current embargo. But if we take a step-by-step and piecemeal approach, and we go the most logical route, which is food. I mean, we got to ask ourselves at this point, who is being punished by this embargo? Certainly the Castro regime is not being punished. I doubt that they're feeling much of the effects, but American producers are, and the Cuban people are. And so what we're trying to do is match these two groups up. The American producers that can feed people, they import 80% of their food. They are a service economy, such as their economy exists. It's service oriented. And so they can't feed themselves. They need help, and we certainly can meet that need, particularly as it applies to rice and chicken, but a host of other commodities that they could benefit from, and so could the American producer. So I think that's a good step from a humanitarian perspective, as well as expanding market access for ag commodities.
And continuing on with the idea of working in a humanitarian way, I know Senator Bozeman supports an idea of using food, rice, putting more rice in aid packets and helping countries and those in need in that way. Explain to me your support of that idea as well.
Well, I think what this is basically sort of, utilizing PL 480, Public Law 480, which is designed to help do two things. First and foremost, provide food aid to countries in need around the world. And the byproduct of that, the second part of that, is it helps farmers here in the United States help liquidate back stocks. That has a stabilizing effect in the marketplace. If we're sitting on tons and tons of rice with no way to liquidate that, that's going to depress prices and keep them low. We want to see, number one, let's address that food aid issue. And outside of the United States, rice is a staple. In the United States, we've got so much to choose from that rice is not necessarily our first choice, but most countries around the world utilize rice on a daily basis. And so we certainly think it's relevant and appropriate to add rice to that food aid package. And then, the net effect from the market perspective is that it'll deplete stocks and have, hopefully, a little bit of upside for the markets for rice producers.
And what kind of support is that garnering around the Capitol?
It's early, and so it's hard to say. What the senator and I did was we sent a letter to the administrator of USAID and also to the Ag Secretary asking for their consideration. And so there's not been any legislative initiative at this point right now. We've just been in contact with via letter to those two principals and hope that would be sufficient to get them to reconsider that and make sure that rice is included in our food aid packages.
All right, I'm going to switch gears now, talking about the presidential campaign. I know you recently came out and endorsed Marco Rubio. Tell me, first of all, why make that endorsement? What is it about him that you support and that speaks to you?
Well, I think he's a constitutional conservative. I think that's appealing. He has a depth and breadth of knowledge on national security issues. That's appealing. He's got the legislative experience that I think, you hear so much about, governors, and I think governors do have executive experience. But I think it's also important to note that a good governor relies heavily on his legislature, just as a good president would and should rely heavily on his legislature or her legislature. And so I think that what you have to do is apply those two together, and we are a co-equal branch of government. So I don't think you really need to look exclusively to governors to say whether a presidential candidate can be successful or not. I think he has a wealth of experience that he brings to the table, and that perspective as a legislator that would serve him well as a chief executive.
How do you see this playing out after Iowa, where he had a pretty good showing coming in third, and then, of course, New Hampshire this past week, not coming in third. I think you placed fifth out of that New Hampshire primary. Tell me a little bit about what you're expecting going forward from the campaign, and can we see a stop in Arkansas? He's one of the only presidential candidates who has not made it out to our state yet.
Right. As far as New Hampshire goes, the debate certainly, I think, had an effect in the short term. But you look at those numbers and you see that he was essentially sharing that fourth place spot with President Bush. And there was really only a couple of hundred votes that separated him from Senator Cruz. Pretty tight there in the subordinate rankings there. Obviously, Donald Trump had a good day in New Hampshire yesterday. But downstream, I think he's still well positioned to move into South Carolina and other places where he should do very, very well. He's very strong pro-life. That's another thing I like about him, is his position and his action on pro-life issues, and that'll play very, very well going into South Carolina and also, the SEC primary and other places around the country. So I think he's positioned to do well. Yes, he needs to come to Arkansas. I've talked to him about that, and we're going to do what we can to try and get him there, because he certainly, I think, would get a warm reception in Arkansas. Yeah,
can we expect to see you back here working with him when he comes and visits the state?
I hope so. I mean, if we can get him to come to Arkansas, certainly I would think I would be in the mix in some capacity.